Good afternoon, friends and newcomers to the South Orange Library Lecture Series. We're so fortunate to have a most successful and brilliant author and filmmaker, Paul Auster, speak here on Zoom. Paul grew up in South Orange and graduated from Columbia High School and is the author of dozens of books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, which have been translated into approximately 40 languages. Paul is the author of classics such as the New York Trilogy, Moon Palace, The Book of Illusions, and 4321. Coincidentally, today is 4321. I reached out to Paul, and he couldn't have been more gracious. He is donating in lieu of a speaking fee to give the donation to Mend Hunger Relief Network of Essex County. And it's really needed, so we appreciate that very much. You're very special, and we certainly appreciate your donating your time and talent to enriching us with your words and also to helping the people in need in Essex County. Paul will be interviewed by author and poet Laura Sims. Laura's debut novel, Looker, was published to rave reviews from The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, People magazine, and elsewhere. Looker has been optioned for television by Emily Mortimer's King Bee Productions. Her poetry and prose has won many awards. She lives here in South Orange and works part-time as our reference librarian and my friend. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Laura, who will now introduce our very celebrated guest, Paul Auster.
Yay. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for that lovely introduction. Welcome, Paul. And I'm so pleased and honored to be here speaking to you today because I've been a huge fan of your work ever since reading Moon Palace back in the 1990s. And I've gone on to read many more since then. And I'm very excited to be talking about this gorgeous novel, which you probably can't see, Paul, but I guess you know what it looks like. 4321. This is the library's copy, by the way. So if anybody is wanting it, I'm going to return it soon. And for those who don't know this book, this is Paul's latest novel. It is a coming of age novel. And unlike any other coming of age novel that you would read, it follows Ferguson, the main character's journey through early life, I should say, from very early childhood to about early adulthood, 20s. But what's different about it is that it follows Ferguson in 4 different versions of his life, and they run alongside each other, these parallel lives throughout the novel. So that makes it a really interesting and unique take on the coming of age novel. And I found it to be this hugely human book. It explores so many huge things, politics, political engagement, love in its many forms, sex and sexuality, art, the writing life, ambition, you name it. It is basically an intensive exploration of what it means to be alive. And in addition to that, it is incredibly engrossing and just carries you along. It's a very long book. It's almost 900 pages. But I hardly noticed as I was just carried along on this beautiful narrative, and highly recommend everyone to read it if you haven't already. So I have some questions for you, as you know, Paul. And as you probably know, the most important thing about this novel, or the most important element of the novel, is that it is set in northern New Jersey, here in South Orange, Maplewood, West Orange. And I just was curious what it was like to grow up in this area. I know that Ferguson, your main character, he begins to have kind of a complicated relationship to this area, to the suburbs, as he grows. And as soon as he can, he gets the heck out of here and goes to New York and Paris. But I'm just curious, what was it like to grow up here in South Orange and Newark?
Well, I was born in Newark
Right.
in 1947. And when I was 5, my parents bought a house on Irving Avenue in South Orange, and that's where I grew up there. And I would say that for me, it was a wonderful childhood. It was an extraordinary liberation, from living in a small apartment to having a house with a backyard. And, I was able to walk everywhere on my own. This was a period when parents didn't hover.
Mhm.
Children were
Right, right.
free back then. And we went to school. I'm talking about once we got to be 7 or 8 years old, we just left school at the end of the day and we're off by ourselves until dinner time. No
Right.
one checking on us. We played a lot of baseball in Grove Park, right in the
Oh,
neighborhood.
yes.
And I felt it was really a kind of enchanted childhood. What happens, though, when you live in this kind of bucolic suburban world, it's great when you're little,
Mm.
but once you hit adolescence, and you start getting itchy feet, and your body's changing, your mind is changing, the focus of your life is changing. Um, Most of us, I think, were itching to get out, but it doesn't at all denigrate the advantages of that childhood, which
Right.
was, I think, precious. Another wonderful thing about this childhood was that at the time, the school system in South Orange and Maplewood, where they were strict adherents of the John Dewey method of education,
Mm.
which meant that from first grade through sixth grade, we never had homework. Not one stitch of homework did we have to do.
Wonderful.
There might have been an occasional special project, but in general, they went by the theory, and I think it's a very sound theory, that if you can't teach the kids how to read and write and do math in the hours of the school day, then you're not doing the job. And certainly saddling children, with 50 math problems when they should be running around outdoors and
Mhm.
letting off steam is a very bad pedagogical method. And
I
I
agree.
I must say that I
agree.
think what we've done to American children in this country is criminal.
Mhm.
We're so nervous that we're not educating them properly that we overdo it and we crush them with work. And
Mhm.
having been the father of two children, and still am, I can remember their childhoods and the awful grinding assignments they would have for no purpose
Mm.
except to beat down their spirits and
Mhm.
exhaust them
Yeah.
when they shouldn't have been doing that. So I feel blessed to have had that liberty as a little person. And I have to say that the South Orange Public Library, which is what's bringing
Yes.
us here together today, was fundamental in my upbringing because neither one of my parents went to college. Neither one of them was a reader of books. But for some reason or another, I was interested in books from the time I was a small child. And so I would go to the South Orange Public Library and take books out. And that's how I did my first reading.
Mm.
And I chose the books myself. I would find what seemed interesting, take them home. And it wasn't terribly far. I could walk. I mean, Irving Avenue, if you kept walking down the street, it would intersect with Scotland Road.
Mhm.
And then you make a left, and the library was on Scotland Road. Am I right or wrong? Yes?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's right. Mhm.
Is it still there?
Yes,
Yeah.
still there.
Well, so it was probably a 15-minute walk from my house, and I would get the books and then bring them home. The other thing that was great about that town then was the ability to play sports, which I was passionate about, and they had a very good little league
Mhm.
in South Orange, which I participated in for, I guess, all 4 years. It was possible to do that, but mostly, we were playing pickup games, with no adults around, making
Right.
our own rules and just deciding disputes among ourselves, usually verbally, sometimes with a little fight or two, but it's just good to let children work things out on their own.
Yes. Yes.
And so I have, hundreds and hundreds of extraordinary memories from that period. I won't, bore you with all of them, but um, uh, there it was. And then it was South Orange Junior High School, which then was a brand new school. I think it had only been in operation for a year or two when I went there. And that was an exciting move. I remember because in elementary school you're stuck in class with the same teacher and the same 20 or 25 kids the whole year, and suddenly there were over 1,000 kids and everyone streaming through the halls going to different classes. That was an exciting movement up into a more grown-up way of being educated.
Right.
I formed great friendships with many people there. I'm still in touch with a few people. And I actually, I have to say, went to, this was a few years ago, my 50th high school reunion, Columbia High School
Really?
reunion.
For
Yeah.
Columbia.
Yeah, so I graduated from Columbia High School in '65. So it was, I guess, 2015 when I went
Wow.
to the reunion. And that was a class of around 700 students that graduated, and I was amazed, about 125 of them showed up for the 50th,
Wow.
which seems remarkable.
Yeah.
100 of us were dead,
Oh,
right? So the numbers were 600.
right.
So that's about 25% of the living survivors of the class of '65 were there.
Wow.
And it was very moving. I remember when I was in kindergarten at the Marshall School, I fell madly in love with a girl, Kathy. She had a long blonde ponytail, and we were crazy about each other and got into a lot of trouble together, making mischief. We were scolded by the teacher numerous times. And there she was at the 50th reunion, a,
Oh, wow.
a retired professor.
Did she still have the pigtails?
No, she didn't have the pigtails, but we had the nicest talk. And we both remembered a lot of things from way, way, way back in our early childhoods. So I found it very moving, I have to say.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, moving a little bit closer to the book, as I said, it was really a powerful experience for me reading the novel. And I loved following Ferguson through his life, through the 4 different versions of his life. What inspired you to tell the story this way, to explore the parallel lives of one character?
Well, this book comes at after a lifetime of writing other books, as you know.
Right.
I think
Yes.
it was my 17th novel,
Yeah.
and then there are also 5 autobiographical works that I've written.
Right.
So it's a lot of writing and a lot of thinking about how to write, and I think I've often been exploring in my work the forces of what I would call contingency.
Mm.
That something happens, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen. That how so much of life is taking different forks in the road of life. You go left, you go right. Sometimes these decisions seem arbitrary, but then they wind up determining a lot of what happens to you afterwards.
Right.
And I've always been speculating, I think all human beings do, about, well, what if I had done this back then instead of that? I mean, the very fact, for example, you have to catch a bus, and you run for the bus and you miss it, and you have to sit there waiting for the next bus to come.
Mhm.
And suddenly someone sits down to wait for the bus as well. And you start talking to that person who happens to be someone you find rather attractive.
Mhm.
And one thing leads to another, and you marry that person. And
Mm.
then you have children and have a whole life together.
Mhm.
Well, one asks the question, what would have happened if you hadn't missed the bus?
Right.
What would your life have been? Well, it would have been entirely different or
Right.
substantially different in any case.
Yes.
And just that's as one small example. So I decided to write this book as playing out the possible different paths the same life could have taken given the slightly different circumstances of each version as I present it. So I have this boy, Archie Ferguson, who's actually Jewish, because I used an old joke that in the first page of the book about the Jewish immigrant who arrives from Russia at Ellis Island. He doesn't speak a word of English. And he meets, he's very young, he's about 18 or 19, and he meets an older Russian Jew as they're waiting around to be interviewed by immigration officials. And the older one says, so what's your name? And he gives this long Russian name.
Mhm.
And he said, that's not a good name for America. You need a new name for your new life in America.
Right.
And the young one said, well, what do you suggest? What's a good name? And the man says, Rockefeller. Tell them you're Rockefeller. Tell them you're Rockefeller. So an hour or two goes by, and by the time the exhausted immigrant sits down to talk to the official, he's forgotten. And he says, the man says, your name? And then he says in English, ich hab vergessen. I've forgotten. In Yiddish, he says in Yiddish, ich hab vergessen. I've forgotten. And so the man writes down in my novel, Ichabod Ferguson. And that's how he gets his name.
That's
And
great.
yeah, so spinning out from poor Ichabod Ferguson's rather short, dismal career as an immigrant, Ferguson's father is one of the sons of this immigrant, and he marries a woman, Rose Adler, from New York, and they have a child, Archie, named after the uncle of the mother, Rose's uncle Archibald. So in one version, these are all genetically the same people, right? Archie is the same boy,
Right.
physically and genetically. But in the first iteration, Ferguson 1, his parents moved to Montclair, and the father struggles in his business.
Mhm.
And it leads to a certain kind of boy who's sort of hard on himself, and also a bit, how shall I say, unwilling to let go, a little self-contained. He has a terrible accident in high school. He loses part of his hand,
Spoilers.
loses his thumb. This
Yes.
is a further blow to his self-confidence. The second Ferguson is a boy who grows up in West Orange, and the things are a little more stable.
Mhm.
He sets up his own little newspaper when he's 11 years old, a one-page, two-sided newspaper that he makes and gives to the kids in the class.
Causes a big ruckus too.
Yeah, and a big ruckus. It causes a lot of consternation for him.
Yeah.
And then the third Ferguson similar circumstances. The father's always in the appliance business, right?
Mhm.
Televisions and vacuum cleaners. And but in this case, through family complications, the I don't want to give the whole thing away. I mean,
No,
the third
don't.
one's father dies when he's 7, and this creates a whole different boy,
Mm.
even though he's the same boy. And all 4 boys, as I say, genetically the same. So therefore,
Right.
they're all interested in sports. They play sports well, and they all gravitate towards one form of writing or another,
Mhm.
be it journalism, fiction writing, film criticism, for example. Um, they all have great sensitivity to music and
Mhm.
care about music, listen to it passionately, but none of them has any ability to play it.
Mm.
And then floating through all this, these 4, and then the fourth one, I should just to finish, his father becomes immensely successful and rich,
Mhm.
and is obsessed with money. The more rich he becomes, the more distant he becomes. And there are tremendous father-son conflicts in the
Mm.
fourth Ferguson. The fourth Ferguson is the one who evolves into a fiction writer. Um, and at the end, one learns that he's the one writing the book. Uh,
Right.
but, uh, you know, so it's just fascinating to me because I think all these little contingencies really do make a difference in how we turn out.
They do.
Essentially, we're the same, but you can't separate nature and nurture. You
Mm.
can't separate the individual from his or her environment.
Right.
I wasn't out to prove this point, but I just assumed it as a given and went from there.
Yes.
So the whole period is in there, from the 50s up until, the 70s.
Yes.
And each one of them is living through those times in a slightly different way,
That's right.
but all of them feeling the times, very, very,
Yes.
very acutely.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
that's the structure of the book.
Yeah.
But through
And
it all, there is a girl named Amy Schneiderman
that's
who
right.
in various iterations plays an enormous role in each one of the Fergusons' lives. Um, and she is, in a way, the female counterpart to Ferguson.
Mm.
Without Amy, who's absolutely essential to the book wouldn't be the book. And,
Right.
and
She
so
is.
one,
Another,
one has to include her as, part of
yeah.
the very core of what happens in this novel, which I was looking at it now over the last couple of days, trying to prepare and remind myself of the book. The paperback edition is 970 pages. I mean, it's long,
Really?
but you're right. I read it now as if someone else wrote it, and it
Right.
just does fly along, doesn't it?
It really does.
There's no nothing bogged down. I'm
No.
astonished that I wrote it. And no, I don't know how I managed to pull it off.
I'm glad
So
that you
rich,
can be
so
surprised.
dense with details of
Right.
all kinds of things. And yet
Yes.
it's not heavy,
No, it really isn't.
and I consciously wrote it as, the years have gone on. My style has changed a bit. It's opened up into longer and longer sentences, which I feel are a kind
Mm.
of whirling dance of words.
Yeah.
And this spin, I think, propels the book forward in a very interesting way. It's just by the time you get to the end of a sentence that lasts a quarter of a page or half a page, phew, you've been through something, and then boom, you jump into the next one, and
Pulled along.
it's another
Yeah,
whirl. And
absolutely.
the style is absolutely essential to how the book is made. And
Yes,
yeah, I'm sure you
yeah,
understand what I'm talking about.
I do.
So
Yeah.
so these are
I,
just some of the things. I mean, we could talk about specifics if you want,
yes.
but
Well,
that's
I had heard you say, sorry, I had heard you say or read that you said that this was an incredibly urgent book. When you were writing it, you felt this urgency.
I'll tell you why. This is
Why
why.
was that?
I started the book, I'm 74 now. I started writing the book when I was 66. 66 happened to be the age my father was when he died. He
Oh,
suddenly
okay.
dropped dead,
Oh my
from one
gosh.
minute to the next. He was very healthy. He played tennis every day. He could still beat me at
Wow.
tennis. And he dropped dead. It was the shock of my life. I had
Oh
no
my
idea.
gosh.
I assumed he was never sick, and I assumed he lived to 90 or 95.
Right.
He never even had a cold, my father.
Wow.
And then he dropped dead. And so it's a weird moment to get to the same age your father was when he died.
Yes.
It's spooky.
Mm,
It's as if there's this kind of diaphanous curtain
mm,
between you and some other state. And when you hit that age your father was at his death, it's as if you've passed through this curtain and you're in another territory altogether.
mm.
So all through it, I kept thinking, well, maybe I'll die at 66 also. Maybe my
Right.
moment will come.
Right.
And then I kept thinking to myself, when I started the book, I said, it's going to take me 7 years to write this. It's a long project.
But
It's
it
like
didn't.
writing
Right.
4 novels in one book.
Right.
And so I thought it would take about 7 years, given my normal pace of writing through
Mm.
these decades of writing. But I wrote it in 3.5
Wow.
because I wrote it in a kind of frenzy. I worked longer hours than ever before.
Mm.
I pretty much worked 7 days a week, or 6.5 days
Wow.
anyway, because I didn't want to drop dead before I finished. I thought
Right.
it would be the worst possible thing is to write half of this big novel and not finish it.
Right.
So that was
Interesting.
it was just, I felt death breathing down my neck.
Right.
And I have to get cracking here. And so that was
Mm.
driving me.
Do you think the urgency was connected with became connected with the style, the long
No,
sentences?
no,
No.
no.
That's just something that
Yeah.
you've developed, these longer
Yeah,
sentences.
it started, I would say in the last, few books before that, it was
Right.
happening. It's just a natural progression. I mean,
Right.
all artists change over the years. I mean, if
Right.
you're running in place for 50 years, how boring is that?
Exactly.
You want to keep changing and mutating and discovering new things. And one would hope after all this time that you actually get better at doing it.
Yeah.
But having looked it over now over these last couple of days, I'm rather amazed at how much is in the book and how
So much.
sort of,
Yeah.
how it just pulses along.
It
Yeah.
really does. Yeah. One of the things that is so prominent in the novel is that Ferguson lives through some very big moments in the life of the country. Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam, the Newark riots. And
Columbia Revolution.
yes, the Columbia,
I
which was so
I
fascinating
was
to
a
read
student at
about.
Columbia, yeah, and I was there, but I was not, as the Ferguson in that cycle is, I was not a reporter for the Daily
Okay.
Newspaper at Columbia.
Okay.
No.
Well, I'm
I was
interested.
actually in one of the buildings.
Really? Okay. Well, this
I got
is
arrested.
this is
But
my
this
question.
Ferguson is writing about it for the Columbia Spectator. And
Right. That's right.
now, very interestingly, Mark Rudd, who didn't grow up in South Orange but Maplewood,
Yeah,
but
that's right. I didn't know he
graduated
had.
high school, and then he was at Columbia also, and he was the the head of SDS,
That's right.
sort of the head of this whole
Movement.
sit-in and strike.
Right.
And I'm still in touch with Mark, and
Really?
yeah, and I sent him those chapters. I said, Mark, I want to know if you think I've gotten it right, the whole thing at Columbia, because if you think there's something wrong, let me know, because
Mhm.
the book's not finished yet. And he called me up and he said, no one has told the story better. It's just absolutely
Oh,
dead on accurate what you've done. And
that's
reading
great.
of the events is perfect. I felt so reassured by this, and emboldened even, that I was really on the right track with
Yes,
thinking
it's
of it.
very vivid. It's,
Yeah,
I didn't know, I knew about it, but I didn't know the details.
yeah.
And so it really brought that whole moment to life.
And it really kind of ends. I mean, the big moment towards the end of the book is the riots in Attica, in the prison in
Right. Yes, that's right.
1991, which was a cataclysm. I don't know if people remember it now, but it was a upstate prison,
Right.
and there were it was a kind of prisoner strike, and and Rockefeller was Rockefeller keeps coming in throughout the book. Rockefeller is always there. He's in the first page of the book, and there he is in the last pages of the book, calling in the state troopers to start killing the prisoners in the prison. You see,
Wow.
all these guys with rifles up on the parapets of the prison, shooting into the yard. It was a bloodbath, and because he refused to go on negotiating, and the prisoners, it was overcrowded. It was mostly Black and Latino, but in this racially divided prison, the white, Black, and Latino prison all came together. It was a moment of absolute racial harmony, fighting against the injustices of what they were subjected to. And Rockefeller, I think, he wanted to prove how tough he was, and not just some liberal Republican, you see, because he always wanted to be president.
Yeah.
And after that, after Watergate, of course, when Gerald Ford was made the president, he appointed Rockefeller as the vice president. That's as far as Rockefeller got. But I'm sure, killing all those people in Attica helped get him the job of vice president anyway. It's a sinister equation, but anyway, that's another
Yes,
enormous.
that's in the final part of the book.
Yeah,
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 there's this moment when Ferguson says to be a journalist, or it's when he understands, I guess, because in that version, he is a journalist, and he understands that to be a journalist meant you could never be the person who tossed the brick through the window that started the revolution. And I guess that's one of my questions for you is, what are your thoughts on the role of the artist in political movements at these crucial moments? We're having crucial moments right now, but
yes, we are living through a moment, I guess, as intense, if not even more intense, than what we lived through in the 60s.
yeah,
And there's been nothing in between even to compare
no,
either one of those periods. I have a very open mind about what artists should or shouldn't do,
okay,
because I don't feel an artist is obliged to do anything but his or her own art. And believe me, not engaging in the big issues of the moment is not a discredit to an artist. I mean to say, we've had socialist realism from the Soviet Union, where everything had to be politicized. The most dreadful, boring, dreary works of literature you can imagine. Always correct, but so what? Art is not about being politically on the right side or any side, but it's about revealing human truths. And I would contend that a woman or a man writing a novel about a tea party of very rich women on Fifth Avenue, which has nothing to do with the big battles going on in our culture right now, could write a book that is so penetrating, so heartbreaking, so true and important humanly, that it would dwarf a novel, say, directly confronting racism or any one of the terrible things going on in our society.
Mm.
So I think we have to be careful about asking artists to do something or other. There are no rules in art. There's no one way to write a book. There's no one way to paint a painting. And
Right.
once you begin putting down rules, you're lost. You're really
Right.
lost. I mean, what about Marcel Proust, for God's sakes?
Right.
He was born in 1871 when the Paris Commune was being fought. Well, he didn't write about, wars and politics.
Right.
Writing about something else.
Mm.
But, many people feel he is the greatest novelist of the 20th century.
Right.
Good
Right.
argument for that. Or Kafka, one of my very favorites. I love Proust and I love Kafka so much. How different are they?
Right.
Kafka never addressed any direct political issue.
Right.
He's writing weird dreams, dream stories, parables about life and about man's relation to the Almighty or the lack of an Almighty. And they're so disturbing and so funny. I mean, Kafka is hilarious. I hope 4321 at moments is hilarious too. I hope.
Definitely.
Yeah. There's lots of humor in these things, and I don't know. I would say no. On the other hand, every artist is also a citizen, and I would assume that every artist has his or her political opinion. It just doesn't have to be in the work.
In the work, right.
I just don't think we should demand that of people. It's not even interesting to think in those terms.
Right.
Although I should say, just to because I would like people to find out about us. Back in August, I and Siri Hustvedt, my wife, and my daughter, and our daughter Sophie Auster, who's a singer and a songwriter, we were among the founding members of a group that we named Writers Against Trump. And we started as about 8 or 10, and we've grown to 2000s. And we've done all kinds of events, and all Zoom, everything on computers for the time being. And we vowed to keep the name alive until January 20th.
Okay.
Which we did. And now we've reconfigured ourselves as Writers for Democratic Action. And, our first event is coming up actually a week from today, which is, the question of statehood for Washington, D.C.
Oh, right.
There'll be a number of people on. Then the next month, there's actually an event that I've organized. This is interesting because this is involving another local boy, Alex Kesar, who went to Columbia High School with me. He grew up in Maplewood. Well, he's a professor at Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government. And Alex is the sort of leading authority on voting rights in America. He's written 2 enormous books, one called The Right to Vote, and then a more recent one called Why Do We Still Have the Electoral College? So I'm going to interview Alex next month on another Zoom event, about all the voting issues at stake right now, as now the S1 and S4 bill is, has gone to the Senate. So I'm involved. I'm deeply involved, but I don't want my writing to be just a question of addressing these issues.
Right.
So
that makes sense. And can you tell us again the name of what the organization is called
Writers
now?
for Democratic Action.
Writers for Democratic Action. Okay. Everybody take note.
You should go online, look it up, and join.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Participate in it. I mean, if you agree with what we're doing.
Yes.
Writers for Democratic.
Great. I have one last question for you, then I think we'll take some audience questions.
Okay.
So for anyone who's interested in asking Paul a question, you can start putting them in the chat. But I was wondering, I love the moment when Ferguson writes an early story. I can't remember if it's in middle school or high school, but it's the story called Soulmates. That's SOLE. And it's about a pair of shoes. And he shows it to his English teacher, and his English teacher, ninth grade. Okay. So his English teacher is kind of horrified by the profanity in it, and and then he shows it to his aunt and uncle, who are very smart and worldly, and they love it and they encourage him. And he has this moment where he realizes that if he's going to keep sharing his work with the world, he has to be prepared to be punched as often as he was kissed, or punched 10 times for every kiss, or 100 times with no kiss at all. And I just love that formulation for thinking about, writers dealing with reader responses. And I was just wondering how, after this very long career that you've had already, how do you deal with reviews and responses? And
at the beginning, of course, when I was just starting out, of course, I was very curious to read the reviews of my books. It never happened before, and I wanted to read them. And everything I've ever written has been praised and condemned. Everything. I haven't written a single book in which there was a unanimous opinion. I mean, there's been more good than bad.
Right.
Crucified at times over the various newspapers and magazines. I mean, there's a legion of people who despise what I do, and whatever I do is, revolting to them. And others who walk around thinking I'm it, the best thing since sliced bread, and I am the writer. So what are you supposed to do with this? I think the only honest response is to reject everything. Reject the praise and reject the scorn. I mean, just turn your back on the whole thing. So for years now, I don't read the reviews anymore.
You don't? Okay.
I mean, I asked my agent to tell me, so, what
summarize
good or bad,
okay.
Well, you got a good one here, a good one there, a good one there, not so good here, not so good here. Fine. That's all I want to know, because what happens is, in the long run, now maybe you've experienced this, or maybe you've only gotten raves, I don't know.
Nope.
Is that you remember the bad, nasty things people say about you, but you don't remember a single one of the good things.
Absolutely. Every word of the nasty ones.
And there are phrases people have written that are burned into my brain, really negative things. And I don't want to add any more of these stinging rebukes to my memory bank.
Good.
So
that's smart.
I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
To be really honest, then, you can't just reject the bad ones and exult in the good ones. You have to say, I just push them all.
Reject it all. Wow.
Because art is long, as people say, and most of the people writing reviews are incompetent anyway, and they don't know how to read. And so why they have the power they do, I don't really understand, but they do.
Right.
They come and go. And who remembers the names of book reviewers anyway, right?
Well, and now you have, people who are coming up now, writing now, we have to deal with everyone being a reviewer and being able to post their thoughts online.
I don't have a computer.
I know. I think that's so smart.
I've never looked myself up online. I don't want to
know.
I don't want to know. But, look, the August New York Times book review notoriously condemned Dostoevsky when the first translations were published. They condemned The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. They gave a bad review to every novel William Faulkner ever published, and they absolutely despised Nabokov, and they wrote negatively about him. So, what are you supposed to do? All these writers have survived long beyond the lives of the little pygmies who wrote about them in the New York
Right.
Times. So
Right, right. Oh my gosh. Well, that's great. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to look and see um, about what questions we have. 1 second.
okay, maybe they're all silent.
They're not. Let's see. Okay, someone has asked, could you explain the title? And I'm not sure, I guess the title of the novel.
Yes. Okay, I will, because it's an interesting question. My original title, the one I was set on from the beginning and for the first year and a half or so, I just simply wanted to call the book Ferguson.
Okay.
Well, then this terrible thing happened in a town that I had never heard of and no one in America had heard of, except people who live in Missouri, Ferguson, Missouri, that horrible murder of Michael Brown, the white cop. And suddenly Ferguson became another name in the long litany of names associated with the civil rights movement,
Right, right.
Montgomery, and now Ferguson is part of that. So I realized that I couldn't publish a novel with that title. Everyone would think I was writing about that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I wasn't. And the novel is then really about the structure of the book, the numerical title. I know it sounds like a countdown for a moon rocket blastoff, but it does actually convey what the book is all about, but you have to.
Right,
And I don't want to give that away.
right. Let's see. 1 second. Okay. You mentioned the nature versus nurture issue within the book. How much do you think that applies with respect to sexuality in light of the different paths of the Archies?
Oh, well, it's a very interesting question. Um, um, well, I should say, look, Ferguson #2 does not live throughout the whole book. He
Oh no, that's a spoiler.
well, okay, because he really, but he's not part of this discussion
Right,
about sexuality. The other,
right. That's true.
two of them are vigorous heterosexual lusty boys. One of them turns out to be bisexual
Mhm.
um, for a number of reasons. He's #3, and he's the one whose father died. He's the most tormented, the most, the one, one could look at as the most confused, the most tormented, the most irresponsible in many ways, but also, to my mind, the most adorable one, the most tender one, the one, in fact, maybe I like the best of all of them. And he's seduced by, when he's 15 years old. So an older boy seduces him, and he realizes, well, it's not so bad. What difference does it make? I mean, I'm 15 years old. No girl will want to sleep with me now, but I can have sex now. And he just realizes that he's both.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really feel guilty about it.
Mm-mm.
He knows it's an inconvenience in many ways, but he embraces it as a more interesting destiny for himself.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do believe that these are the kinds of things that can happen to anybody.
Mm.
I mean, when your sexuality is forming in your early adolescence, I mean, everyone is everything anyway. I mean, there are no firm distinctions yet, and maybe there never are. Finally, so it's a problem if you want to think it's a problem, but it's not a problem if you don't.
Right, right. Great. And I should be saying the names too. This is from Melissa Litwin. She says, listen to your recording of the book. Wonderful to hear your voice again. I wonder about your process. Do you write 4 stories and then weave them together, or take the 4 Archies forward year by year at the same time?
No, I wrote the book in the order in which it's
It
printed.
appears.
I,
Okay.
I had to know what was going on in each story before going on to the story. They're all interconnected in a certain way. And as again, I thought of it as a kind of gyroscope that's spinning
Right.
cycles. So the way the book is set up, you have 1.0 is the first chapter, and that's the prehistory. That tells the story about how Ferguson's parents meet, get married, and the chapter ends with him being born.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then 2.1, etc., through 7 cycles.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
Why was it 7? Did you
I decided I didn't want to take them beyond the very first notion I had. I'll take them right through old age.
Right.
Then, if I'd wanted to write a 20,000-page novel, I suppose I could have done that. But I really think that the first 20 years of a person's life are the most fascinating.
Yes.
Most
Yes.
changes take place when you go from a little human blob after your birth into a full-fledged human being,
Right.
fully formed and ready to go out and live the rest of your life.
Right.
It's a fascinating time. And so, I spent a lot of time thinking about, what's the difference between a 6-year-old's response to something and an 8-year-old's response or a
Right.
10-year-old's response. They're very different. And
They are.
you're in a constant state of transition, as a child. And it's a wonder we get through it when I think about it. You wake up one morning and you're taller than you were the day before.
Right.
Or suddenly, there's a hair under your arm. I mean, what's going on? As
Yeah.
one of the Fergusons, going through puberty, says he felt like he was, the site of an experiment by a demented scientist. What was going to happen? He had no control over it.
Right.
I started thinking about that movie, The Wolf Man. Remember? That is the parable about adolescence, of puberty.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Suddenly hair is growing all over your body. And it's really a very confusing time.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And even physically, the brain changes.
Right.
You're about 14 years old. The prefrontal cortex develops more. And suddenly you're capable of abstract thinking in ways that you weren't before. So when you were 12, you wouldn't have the same thoughts that you have at 14.
Right.
At 12, you're probably not deeply wrestling with ontological questions like questioning the existence of God and things like that.
Right.
But at 14, you do.
Right.
14, you start to, wonder. And then there's that earlier moment, which I would call, the dawn of self-conscious reflection, occurs at around the age of 6. When you advance to the next level. At 6, you can tell yourself, I'm thinking a thought, and I can think about the fact that I'm thinking about the thought. At 4, you can't do that.
No. Right.
You just can't. Your brain is not capable of it.
Right.
But at 6, you can. And then at 14, depending, 13 to 15, your brain starts to become, I guess, what we would call an adult brain, but it's developing.
Right.
And really, I don't think it ever stops, but it keeps developing well into your 20s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Ali Hoback says, I was wondering what book or books you consider to be foundational readings for writers.
Oh, what a good question. What a good question. Well, it depends on what kind of writer you want to be. But if we're talking about fiction, um, I would I would give a couple of writers that most people don't read, and maybe people haven't even heard about. Um, but I think my two favorite short story writers, um, really of all time, are um, um, Kleist, who's a German
Mm.
writer from the 19th century.
I think he's
Wrote,
mentioned in the novel.
yes, definitely. He wrote plays, and he also wrote 8 stories. Among them, Michael Kohlhaas, which is that's a novella, an extraordinary story. And the Marquise of O, which was made into a good movie years ago.
Mm.
The Marquise of O. I think what I love about Kleist is that he breaks all the rules that the teachers tell their kids in classes all across America, which is something that makes me want to scream. They're always saying, "Show, don't tell.
Oh,
Show,
great.
don't tell." What are they talking about? We're not writing movie scripts. We're writing stories. Stories you tell. And Kleist tells and tells and tells and tells. There's hardly any dialogue at all. It is so powerful. It is so propulsive. It is, extraordinary. So read the short stories of Kleist. And then of the 20th century, the one that is available, I think there may be 7 or 8 different translations of Isaac Babel, Russian writer,
Mhm.
who's, I think, people rave about Hemingway short stories. Well, Babel's are better. I think
Mm.
much better. And there's an energy in this prose that it's just fairly bursting. It's like flying off the page. It's so
Wow.
pressed and explosive. And I think if you really want to learn to write, I mean, look at Babel and what he does with a sentence and how he can turn things, And so I think they would be very good models because they don't, especially Babel, he's not forcing you into some, sub path of writing the way, say, Kafka is not a good person to read because there's only one Kafka, and he's not going to really teach you anything. The only thing he'll teach you is how to read Kafka, which
Kafka.
is a beautiful thing, and a wonderful thing, in fact. But
Right.
he's not going to help you become a writer, I don't think.
Interesting. Great. Well, I have one last one and then we'll wrap up. This is also from Melissa Litwin. I have this idea that you, Richard Ford, and Philip Roth hang out and talk about New Jersey. How do you think that conversation might go?
Well, I have to say, I knew Philip Roth,
Mhm.
not well, but amiably for quite a long time. And I think he liked the fact that we both came from Newark.
Mm,
It
right.
amused him. It had amused me too. And we once figured out that my father used to take me to this hot dog place next to Weequahic High School. It was called Sid's Hot Dogs.
Mhm.
God, I don't know if there's anyone out there who remembers Sid's Hot Dogs. They
I
were
do.
boiled. Someone,
Phyllis does.
Phyllis remembers. Good.
I'm older than you. That's
Yeah.
why.
Well, it was a place filled with steam because these were boiled hot dogs and they were delicious. And it was an exciting place to go, I remember. Well, it turned out that Philip had an after-school job working at Sid's. And he was about, I don't know, 14 or 15 years older than I was. And we assumed perhaps it's possible that at one of those visits with my father, Philip served me a hot dog. And so we like to think about that. And we really didn't talk about New Jersey at all, not really. And then with Richard Ford, I know him too. And I've had some very jolly times with Richard, but we've never talked.
Never talk about New Jersey.
No.
The horror. The horror.
The
Well,
thing
thank
is,
you
writers
so
never
much.
talk about writing, that's
Yes, of
yeah.
course.
No, we talk about baseball or something, but not about writing.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for doing this, and we appreciate it so much.
Well, it
And
was a
it's been such
pleasure
a
to
pleasure.
go back in my imagination to South Orange for this hour. So thank you for
Yes,
inviting
we hope you'll visit it in real life.
And
me.
so we can meet you, right?
At some point, I'll be back. I'll come
Good.
into the library and say hi.
Yes, please do. And
I
think
want to
Phyllis-
thank, I want to thank you, Laura, for your very insightful questions.
Of
And
course.
to our fascinating and fabulous Paul Auster, I leave you with the quote under your picture from your Columbia High School yearbook. The pen is in his hand. Do you realize they knew even then that you would be a successful author at such a young age? and my friend showed me that quote, and what could be more apropos?
That's
Thank
fine.
you so much for sharing your time and your talent with us today. Your wife, Siri, is lovely, and I hope one day she'll be able to speak at our group because she's a very talented
Oh, she's a
author
great
and
writer.
she's involved in so much.
Great writer. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very
And
much.
Thank you all.
Okay.
I wish all of you a very happy Passover and a very happy Easter. And thank you for joining us for this very special conversation with Paul Auster. And thank you, Paul, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul and Laura.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Lauren,
Thanks for coming, everyone.
you were great.
Thanks, Phyllis.
You were. I mean it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It was great.
Oh, thank you. It was fun.
I'm buying the book. I don't want to hold up the book while it's in the library.
You should. You should buy it.
So many people will want to read it. I have to buy it. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. And